The galaxy is vast beyond comprehension. 100 billion stars scattered across the void, each one home to worlds teeming with life, conflict, and the eternal struggle between light and darkness. The Force binds it all together, an invisible thread, connecting every living thing in an intricate web of destiny and purpose. The Jedi understood this. The Sith sought to dominate it. And for millennia, these two philosophies warred across star systems, shaping the fate of civilizations. But the Force had never encountered anything like what was coming. In the Outer Rim, far from the gleaming towers of Coruscant and the watchful eyes of the fledgling New Republic, there existed places where desperate men did desperate things. The Empire had fallen. The Emperor was dead. And in the chaos that followed, warlords and Moffs carved out their own fiefdoms from the corpse of galactic order. Some clung to military might. Others sought political maneuvering. Moff Varys Tanner sought something older. The ritual chamber had been carved into the bedrock of Korriban itself, ancient Sith homeworld, tomb of dark lords, and repository of secrets that predated the Republic by thousands of years. Tanner had spent 3 years excavating this particular temple, losing hundreds of workers to cave-ins, madness, and things that moved in the shadows between torchlight. But he had found what he sought, a ritual described in texts so old they crumbled at the touch, promising to summon a servant from beyond the veil of reality itself. The inscriptions are clear. Moff Tanner, the archaeological specialist's voice trembled as she read from the holographic translation. A being of absolute darkness, unkillable, eternal, bound to serve whoever completes the summoning. Tanner smiled beneath the harsh lighting of portable generators. Around him, 100 stormtroopers stood at attention, their white armor stained red by Korriban's dust. At the chamber's center, a circular pattern had been etched into the stone floor, symbols that hurt to look at directly, geometries that seemed to shift when viewed from different angles. Then we proceed. The ritual required blood. Tanner had brought prisoners for this purpose, rebels, dissidents, anyone who had spoken against Imperial remnant authority. They screamed as the ancient words were spoken, their life force draining into the pattern, making the symbols glow with sickly crimson light. The temperature plummeted. Breath became visible mist. And somewhere in the darkness beyond the floodlights, something laughed. It was not a human sound. The stormtroopers opened fire immediately, disciplined, trained, utterly useless. Blaster bolts vanished into the shadows without impact. The laughter grew louder, echoing from every direction at once. And then the screaming started. Not the prisoners this time. The troopers. Moff Tanner watched in frozen horror as his soldiers were pulled into the darkness one by one. He saw glimpses, shadows that moved. Wrong. Eyes that glowed like burning coals. Teeth that gleamed in the muzzle flash of desperate weapons fire. In 17 seconds, 93 stormtroopers were reduced to silence. The archaeological specialist had simply stopped existing. There wasn't even a body. And then he stepped into the light. Tall. Impossibly tall. Or perhaps that was simply the presence he exuded. The way reality seemed to bend around him like space-time near a black hole. A red coat that moved without wind. A hat with a wide brim that cast his face in shadow. Glasses that reflected the dying glow of the ritual circle. Orange and circular, hiding whatever passed for eyes beneath. The figure surveyed the carnage with what could only be described as profound disappointment. That's it. The voice was deep, resonant, carrying an accent Tanner couldn't place because it didn't exist in any galactic database. Blood sacrifice, ancient words, promises of eternal servitude. And I get. He gestured broadly at the chamber. A cave, on a desert planet, with bargain bin soldiers who couldn't hit a barn from inside the barn. Tanner found his voice. You are the servant summoned by. The laughter returned. But this time it was focused, directed, and infinitely more terrifying for its proximity. Servant. The word dripped with amusement. Oh, that's adorable. Tell me, little man in your little uniform, do you know what I am? The ritual texts described. The ritual texts were written by people who are dead. Very dead. Impressively dead, considering how long ago they died. The figure moved closer. And Tanner realized with dawning horror that his feet weren't touching the ground. I am Alucard, the no-life king, the bird of Hermes. I have drunk the blood of millions and walked through centuries of human stupidity. And I have never, he paused, tilting his head as if listening to something. Actually, hold on. Did you say galaxy? As in the galaxy? Stars and planets and spaceships. Tanner blinked. Ah, yes. The vampire's grin stretched wider than any human mouth should allow. Oh, oh, this is wonderful. New reality, new playground. And he sniffed the air, and his grin somehow grew even larger. What is that? That energy. It's everywhere. In everything. Like a cosmic background radiation of pure drama. The Force, Tanner whispered. You sense the Force. The Force. Alucard rolled the word around like wine. And let me guess, there are people who use this Force to do magic tricks, move things with their minds, swing around glowing swords like they're compensating for something. The Jedi, the Sith, they, space wizards, Alucard's voice carried the tone of a man who had just been told. Christmas came early and also brought friends. You have space wizards with laser swords. He threw his head back and laughed, and the sound shook dust from the chamber ceiling. I'm going to love it here. If you want to see more characters, enter the Star Wars galaxy. Hit that subscribe button and drop the name of a character you'd want to see in the comments below. May the Force be with you. Moff Tanner tried to run. He made it 3 steps before a gloved hand closed around his throat, lifting him off the ground with casual ease. Alucard studied him the way a cat studies a particularly uninteresting mouse. Now then, you're going to tell me everything about this galaxy. The politics, the power players, the people who might actually be worth killing. The vampire's eyes glowed behind those orange glasses. And if you're very, very helpful, I might let you live long enough to watch what happens next. In the depths of Korriban, surrounded by the bodies of his soldiers, and the remnants of a ritual gone. Catastrophically right. Moff Varys Tanner began to talk. He talked for 6 hours straight. By the end, Alucard was smiling in a way that promised the galaxy would never be the same. The Razor Crest had seen better days. Then again, the Razor Crest had seen better decades, better centuries, and probably better geological epochs. Din Djarin didn't mind. The old gunship flew true, kept the vacuum out, and had enough hidden compartments to make any Imperial Customs officer weep with frustration. It was home, in the way that only a ship could be home to a man who belonged nowhere. In the hull behind him, the child cooed softly in his floating pram, ears twitching as he watched the blue swirl of hyperspace through the viewport. Din had grown accustomed to the sound, found comfort in it, even though he would never admit such a thing aloud. The foundling was his responsibility, his mission, his something else he didn't have words for. The bounty was straightforward. An Imperial deserter named Kessler had stolen classified data from a remnant outpost and fled to Arvala 7. The client, a different client than the one who had first hired him for the child. Though they all seemed to blur together eventually, wanted Kessler alive. The data was secondary. What mattered was making an example. Din didn't ask questions about examples. Questions complicated things. The Razor Crest dropped out of hyperspace with its usual groan of protesting metal, and Din's hands moved automatically across the controls, running diagnostics, checking scanner readouts, confirming the navigation coordinates. Everything nominal, everything routine. Then the child screamed. It wasn't a cry of hunger or discomfort. It was a sound Din had never heard from the creature, a wail of pure, primal terror that seemed to bypass ears entirely and strike directly at something deeper. The child's eyes were wide, fixed on a point in space that the scanners showed as empty, and his tiny 3-fingered hands were raised as if warding off a blow. Hey, hey! Din was out of the pilot's seat immediately, moving to the pram, placing his hand on the child's head. What is it? What's wrong? The child's response was to burrow into the pram's blankets, still whimpering, still staring at that empty point in space. And then, very softly, he said a word. Din didn't recognize the language, didn't even know the child could speak, but the meaning was somehow clear. Monster. Din looked at the empty space. The scanners still showed nothing. But he had learned, in his months with the foundling, to trust those oversized ears and those ancient eyes. If the child sensed something, then something was there. Okay. He kept his voice calm, steady, the way the armorer had taught him to speak when facing the unknown. Okay, we're going to be careful. He changed course, angling away from the empty point. adding distance between the razor crest and whatever had terrified his ward. The child's whimpering slowly subsided, though his ears remained flat against his head and his eyes never fully closed. Din Djarin didn't know it yet, but he had just made the first of many decisions that would entangle him with something far beyond bounties, Beskar, or the way of the Mandalore. 3 systems away, Alucard was having the time of his own life. Moff Tanner's shuttle was cramped, poorly designed, and completely beneath his dignity. Alucard loved it. He loved the way the hyperdrive whined like a dying animal. He loved the flashing warning lights that indicated 17 different system failures. He loved, most of all, the expression on Tanner's face as the vampire lounged in the captain's chair with his boots on the console. So let me make sure I understand this correctly. Alucard held up a datapad, scrolling through information with a clawed finger. The Empire, big, evil, totalitarian regime with a fetish for gray uniforms and planet-destroying weapons, got beaten by a bunch of rebels. A farm boy with daddy issues. And the power of friendship. The Rebel Alliance was a significant military. The power of friendship, Alucard repeated, grinning. And now the Empire is broken into little pieces, each one run by someone like you, desperately trying to pretend they're still relevant while the actual government. He checked the datapad. The New Republic, how imaginative, slowly mops them up. Tanner's jaw tightened. The Imperial remnant remains a formidable. You were hiding in a cave trying to summon a demon because you're losing. Alucard's grin didn't waver. Don't worry, Moff. I'm not judging. Desperation leads to the most entertaining decisions. He tossed the datapad aside and steepled his fingers, gazing out at the streaming lights of hyperspace. The Force, he could feel it even here, even in this metal tube hurtling through dimensions that shouldn't exist. It pressed against his consciousness like water against a submarine hull, vast and ancient and alive. And it was afraid of him. Alucard had never encountered anything quite like it. In his own world, there were powers beyond human comprehension, the divine, the infernal, the things that lurked in the spaces between. But this force was different. It was everywhere, woven into the fabric of reality itself. And it recoiled from his presence like flesh from a hot iron. He found this absolutely hilarious. Tell me more about these Force users, he said, not looking at Tanner. The Jedi, specifically. You said they were nearly extinct. The Emperor purged them. Order 66 eliminated most of the Order in a single day, and the Inquisitors hunted the survivors for decades. Tanner's voice carried a note of pride. There may be a handful left, hiding in the Outer Rim, but the Jedi are finished. And the Sith. The Emperor was the last true Sith Lord. His apprentice, Darth Vader, died with him. Tanner hesitated. There are rumors. Dark side practitioners who survived. Cultists. Pretenders. But nothing like the power of old. Alucard's smile faded slightly. So the space wizards are basically extinct. And the evil space wizards are even more extinct. That's disappointing. There is one, Tanner said quickly, sensing the vampire's displeasure. Moff Gideon. He's obsessed with a creature, a child of the same species as the old Jedi Master. Yoda. Incredibly powerful in the Force. Despite its age, Gideon has been hunting it for months. The smile returned, sharper than before. A child. A powerful child, being hunted by a warlord. Alucard chuckled. And let me guess, there's someone protecting this child? A warrior? A hero? A Mandalorian? A bounty hunter who broke contract and fled with the asset? A Mandalorian. Alucard's eyes gleamed. Those are the ones with the Beskar armor, yes? The warrior culture that even the Jedi respected. Feared, Tanner corrected. The Jedi feared them. During the Mandalorian Wars. I want to meet this bounty hunter. Alucard stood, his coat swirling dramatically despite the lack of wind. Chart a course. I don't know where. Then find out. The vampire's voice dropped an octave, and shadows began to creep from the corners of the shuttle. You wanted a weapon, Moff Tanner. You wanted a monster to serve your petty ambitions and restore your crumbling empire. He leaned close, and Tanner could smell something ancient on his breath, blood, and grave dirt and centuries of violence. I am not your weapon. I am not your servant. I am your tourist, and you are my guide. Show me something interesting, or I will find entertainment in ways you will not enjoy. Tanner's hands shook as he accessed the Imperial Intelligence Network, searching for any trace of a Mandalorian and his mysterious cargo. In the darkness of the shuttle, Alucard waited, and the Force itself seemed to hold its breath. Somewhere in the void between stars, a child whimpered in his sleep, dreaming of red eyes and endless hunger. Navarro had changed since the fall of the Empire. What was once a volcanic backwater, ruled by criminals and bounty hunters, had become something approaching respectable, trading hub where the New Republic's influence brushed against the lawless frontier of the Outer Rim. Grief Karga had transformed from a guild agent running bounties to a high magistrate running a town, and he wore the transition with the same easy charm he'd worn everything else. Din Djarin didn't trust easy charm, but he trusted Karga, at least enough to land on his world and ask questions. "You look like hell, Mando." Karga's grin was wide as he approached the Razor Crest's landing pad, arms spread in greeting. "And the ship looks worse. When are you going to let me buy you something that doesn't require prayer to start?" "The ship is fine." Din's voice carried its usual flatness through the helmet's modulator. In his arms, the child was unusually still, ears pressed back, eyes darting toward shadows that held nothing. "I need information." Karga's grin faltered slightly. He'd learned to read the Mandalorians' body language over months of reluctant alliance, and something in Din's stance spoke of genuine unease. "Come inside. We'll talk." The cantina had been rebuilt since the Imperial Purge, cleaner now, better lit, with fewer patches of suspicious stains on the floor. Karga led them to a private booth in the back, waving away the serving droid with practiced authority. Din sat with his back to the wall, the child's pram floating beside him, and waited. "So," Karga leaned forward, "all business now. What kind of information are we talking?" 3 days ago, I dropped out of hyperspace near Arvala 7. The kid. Din glanced at the pram. He sensed something that scared him. Scared him worse than the Mudhorn. Worse than the Imperials. Worse than anything I've seen. Sensed something? Like his. Karga made a vague gesture. Magic. The Force. Yes. Din still wasn't comfortable with the word, with what it implied about his foundling's nature. "I changed course, kept distance, but I need to know what's out there." "Have you heard anything?" "Reports of something unusual." Karga's expression shifted. He reached for his drink, took a long pull, and set it down with deliberate care. "Mando, unusual is pretty much the baseline out here. You're going to have to be more specific." "I don't know how to be more specific." The kid called it a monster. The kid talked. One word. Din's helmet tilted slightly. Just one. But I understood it. The silence stretched between them, filled by the ambient noise of the cantina. Glasses clinking, low conversation. The hum of a jukebox playing. Something that might have been popular 30 years ago. Karga drummed his fingers on the table. "There have been rumors," he said finally, "coming out of the deep outer rim. A system called Horus, Imperial Remnant Territory. One of the Moffs trying to play warlord. 3 days ago, all communication from that sector went dark." "That's not unusual. Imperial stations go dark all the time." "They do. But this morning, a refugee ship limped into port. Survivors from a transport that was passing through when." Karga paused. "They said they saw an Imperial cruiser torn apart. Not destroyed, torn. Like something ripped through it from the inside. And they said they heard laughter on the emergency channels." "Laughter, Mando." "While hundreds of people died." The child whimpered softly. Din's hand moved to his blaster without conscious thought. "What kind of laughter?" The survivors couldn't describe it. They just said it was wrong. Wrong in a way that stuck with them. Karga met Din's visor with unusual seriousness. One of them, an older woman, she said she felt it. Through the Force, she said, though she wasn't trained or anything. Just sensitive. She said it felt like looking into a hole where a star should be. Like something that shouldn't exist. Din processed this. His bounty hunter's mind cataloged the information, cross-referenced it with what he knew. Imperial remnants. A destroyed cruiser. Something powerful enough to terrify a Force-sensitive child from systems away. Where was this cruiser when it was attacked? Near Korriban. Karga's voice dropped. Sith space. The old empire kept that whole region locked down tight. Archaeological sites. Ancient temples. Things the Emperor didn't want anyone poking around in. After he died, some of the Moffs got ideas about accessing that power for themselves. They summoned something. Maybe. Or maybe something was already there. waiting. Karga shrugged. Either way, it's not your problem. Your bounty is on Arvala, 7, nowhere near. It's heading this direction. Both men turned to look at the child. The foundling had spoken again. His voice thin and reedy but unmistakably clear. His eyes were fixed on something beyond the cantina walls. Something only he could perceive. Coming here. Coming for. The child's face scrunched in confusion. For fun. Din stood so quickly his chair scraped against the floor. We need to leave. Mando, wait. You need to evacuate the town. Whatever this thing is, it's not stopping. It's hunting. He scooped the child from the pram, holding the small body against his Beskar chest plate. And it's hunting us. Why would it hunt you? Din didn't have an answer, but the child was clinging to his armor with desperate strength. And every instinct honed by years of survival was screaming at him to run. He made it halfway to the landing pad before the sky turned red. Not sunset, it was barely midday. But the light shifted, filtering through something that hadn't been there moments before. Din looked up and saw a ship descending through Navarro's atmosphere. Imperial shuttle, standard design. Nothing remarkable about it except for the way it moved. Too smooth. Too controlled. Like it was being guided by something that understood physics but didn't feel bound by them. The shuttle landed in the center of town with a soft thump that shouldn't have been audible from this distance, but somehow was. For a long moment, nothing happened. The townspeople of Navarro watched, frozen, as the loading ramp began to lower. Mist poured out first. Actual mist, red-tinged and rolling across the ground like something alive. It pooled around the shuttle, spread toward the surrounding buildings, and carried with it a smell that Din recognized from a dozen battlefields. Blood. Old blood. The kind that had soaked into soil and bone and memory. Then the figure emerged. He was tall, impossibly, unreasonably tall. Or perhaps that was just the presence he projected. The way space seemed to compress around him. A red coat that billowed without wind. A hat that cast his features in shadow, despite the harsh volcanic light of Navarro's sun, and glasses, orange and round, that reflected the fear on every face turned toward him. The figure surveyed the town with the expression of a man who had walked into a party and found it wanting. His gaze swept across the buildings, the people, the ships on landing pads, and stopped on Din Djarin, specifically on the child in Din's arms. The smile that spread across that shadowed face was the most terrifying thing Din had ever seen. Not because it promised violence, he had faced violence all his life, but because it promised enjoyment, a predator's anticipation, a connoisseur's appreciation. Well. The voice carried across the plaza without effort, deep and resonant and touched with an accent from no world in the galaxy. A Mandalorian, a real Mandalorian, in the shiny armor and everything. The figure began to walk forward, and the crowd parted before him like water before a ship's prow. And is that the little green miracle I've heard so much about? The one who makes all the scary warlords lose sleep. Din's blaster was in his hand. He didn't remember drawing it. That's close enough. The figure stopped, still smiling, and tilted his head with theatrical curiosity. Or what? You'll shoot me. A laugh, soft and genuinely amused. Oh, please do. I haven't been shot with a space gun yet. I want to know what it feels like. The child buried his face against Din's armor and whispered one word. Over and over. Monster. 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 Din Djarin had faced rancors. He had fought mudhorns, Imperial platoons, and things that crawled out of Tatooine's deepest caves. He had stared down Moff Gideon's forces and walked into firefights that should have killed him a dozen times over. Fear was an old companion, one he had learned to use rather than be used by. This was different. The creature before him, and it was a creature, whatever shape it wore, radiated wrongness like heat from a forge. The force-sensitive child in his arms had gone rigid with terror, eyes squeezed shut, tiny hands gripping Beskar with desperate strength. And Din's own instincts, honed by decades of survival, were screaming a single message with absolute clarity. You cannot win this fight. He fired anyway. The blaster bolt caught the figure dead center in the chest. At this range, with this weapon, the shot should have punched through flesh and bone and dropped the target where he stood. Instead, the figure looked down at the smoking hole in his coat with an expression of mild interest. Huh. He poked a finger through the hole, examining the wound beneath. That tingles. Sort of like being bitten by a very determined mosquito. The smile returned. wider than before. My turn. Din didn't see him move. One moment the creature was 20 meters away. The next, a gloved hand was wrapped around his wrist, gripped like industrial machinery, cold seeping through his glove and into his bones. The blaster clattered to the ground. Now, let's not be rude. The voice was almost gentle, which made it worse. I just want to talk, have a conversation, learn about this fascinating galaxy I found myself in. Those orange glasses, tilted down toward the child. And maybe say hello to your little friend. The child's eyes snapped open. What happened next, Din would struggle to describe even years later. The air changed, pressure dropping, temperature plummeting, the force itself seeming to recoil, and then surge forward like a wave. Hitting a seawall, the foundling raised one tiny hand, and the creature was hurled backward, with enough force to crater the wall of a nearby building. For one heartbeat, Din allowed himself hope. Then the laughter started. It echoed from the rubble, genuine and delighted. As the creature pulled himself free from the destroyed wall, dust cascaded from his shoulders. His hat had been knocked askew, revealing more of his face, pale as corpse flesh, features sharp enough to cut, and a mouth full of teeth that belonged in no human skull. Oh, magnificent! He straightened his hat with theatrical care. Telekinesis? No, more than that. You pushed with your soul, didn't you, little one? I felt it, like being shoved by a very small, very green sun. He cracked his neck, the sound echoing across the suddenly silent plaza. I haven't felt anything like that in centuries. The child slumped against Din's chest, exhausted by the effort. Whatever power he had called upon, it had cost him. His breathing was shallow, his eyes half closed. And Din knew with terrible certainty that there would be no second miracle. What do you want? Din's voice was steady, even if his heart wasn't. The Mandalorian way. Face death with dignity. What do I want? The creature seemed genuinely surprised by the question. I want entertainment. Stimulation. Something. To break the monotony of eternal existence. He spread his arms wide, encompassing the town, the planet, the galaxy beyond. And this place, this wonderful, chaotic, war-torn galaxy full of magic and lasers and warrior cultures, seems like just the ticket. He stepped closer, and this time Din didn't try to stop him. There was no point. Whatever this thing was, it existed beyond the scope of blasters and Beskar. But specifically, right now, I want you. A gloved finger jabbed toward Din's chest plate. A Mandalorian. A real one, from what I understand, not one of the pretenders or the pacifists. Someone who lives by a code, fights like a demon, and never removes his helmet. The creature's grin was sharp enough to draw blood. Do you have any idea how refreshing that is? In my world, everyone compromises. Everyone finds excuses. But you people? You'd rather die than break your creed. You know about us. I had a very informative conversation with a very terrified moth. The creature waved dismissively. He told me everything. The Empire, the Rebellion, the Force, the Jedi, the Sith, and the Mandalorians. The warriors who fought the space wizards to a standstill. The culture that even the planet killers couldn't fully exterminate. Those orange lenses reflected Din's own helmet back at him. I had to meet one of you. Din's mind raced. The creature wasn't attacking, not yet. It was talking, engaging, treating this like a social call rather than a hunt. That meant there was room to maneuver, room to find an angle. You mentioned a moth. Which one? Tanner. Varys Tanner. He was playing with Sith toys on Corbin, trying to summon a demon to win his little war. The creature laughed. He got me instead. Poor bastard thought I'd be grateful. Is he dead? Not yet. He's still useful as a guide. A shrug. Though his usefulness is rapidly declining. Imperial databases only contain so much interesting information, and I've already memorized most of it. The child stirred weakly against Din's chest. Those ancient eyes opened, fixed on the creature with something. Beyond fear, something that looked almost like recognition. Like seeing a shape in the darkness that confirmed every nightmare. You're not from this galaxy. The foundling's voice was barely a whisper, but it carried. You're not from anywhere. The creature's smile softened into something almost gentle. Clever little thing. No, I'm not. I come from a world where vampires and monsters hide in the shadows, where secret organizations hunt us with blessed silver and holy water, where the line between human and demon is written in blood. He crouched down, bringing himself closer to eye level with the child. But here there are no churches, no Vatican, no Helsing organization to keep me in check. The gentleness vanished, replaced by something vast and hungry. Here I am free. The Jedi, the child began, are extinct, or close enough. Your Moff friend was very clear about that. The creature stood, towering over them once more. The great guardians of peace and justice, reduced to a handful of survivors hiding in the outer rim. No one to stop me. No one to even slow me down. He paused, head tilting as if listening to something only he could hear. Unless. The creature's gaze sharpened, focusing on the child with new intensity. Unless. There's someone willing to stand up anyway. Someone who knows they can't win but fights regardless. Someone who makes the impossible choice to face the darkness even when the light has abandoned them. He looked at Din, really looked, for the first time, seeing past the armor and the helmet to whatever lay beneath. Tell me, Mandalorian, if I threatened to take this child, too, drain him dry and add his considerable soul to my collection, what would you do? Din's answer was immediate, automatic, forged in the same fire that had made him who he was. I would kill you or die trying. The silence that followed was absolute. Even the ambient sounds of Navarro seemed to hold their breath. And then, slowly, the creature began to applaud. Yes, the word was almost reverent. Yes, that's exactly what I wanted to hear. He stepped back, giving them space, the predatory tension draining from his posture. You magnificent, stubborn, honorable fool. You'd throw yourself against something you know you can't beat, just because it's the right thing to do. Is that amusing to you? Amusing? The creature shook his head. It's beautiful. It's the most beautiful thing I've encountered in this galaxy so far. He adjusted his coat, brushing away the last of the debris from the child's attack. I'm not going to hurt you, Mandalorian. Either of you. Not today. Din didn't lower his guard. Why? Because you're interesting. The creature's smile returned. But different now. Less predatory. More appreciative. And interesting things are far too rare to waste. He turned, beginning to walk back toward his shuttle, and called over his shoulder. My name is Alucard. I suspect we'll be seeing each other again. Behind him, Din Djarin held his foundling and wondered what kind of galaxy could produce such a monster, and what it would take to survive one. Moff Gideon received the transmission 14 hours after the Navarro incident. He was aboard his light cruiser, the Revenant, reviewing the latest intelligence on the Mandalorians' movements when his communications officer interrupted with a priority alert that made no sense. Sir, we're receiving a broadcast on all Imperial frequencies, unencrypted. You need to see this. The hologram that materialized above Gideon's command table was not what he expected. A figure in red, seated in what appeared to be the captain's chair of an Imperial shuttle, legs crossed with casual arrogance. Behind him, visible through the viewport, was the wreckage of what had once been a Star Destroyer. Good evening, Imperial Remnant. The voice was warm, conversational, utterly at odds with the devastation in the background. My name is Alucard, and I'm new to your galaxy. I wanted to introduce myself. Gideon's jaw tightened. He recognized the debris field. The inexorable Commander Varric's flagship had gone dark 18 hours ago. Varric had commanded 3,000 crew and a full complement of stormtroopers. You may be wondering what happened to this lovely vessel behind me. Alucard continued, as if reading his thoughts across the void of space. The short answer is, I happened. The long answer involves a great deal of screaming, some truly impressive attempts at heroism from your soldiers, and my sincere disappointment that none of them put up more of a fight. The hologram leaned forward, and even through the blue-tinged projection, those orange glasses seemed to gleam with malevolent intelligence. I'm told there are several Moffs out there, each playing at being the heir to your dead empire. I'm told you have fleets and armies, and secret weapons and grand ambitions. The smile widened. I'm bored. So here's what's going to happen. I'm going to visit each of you, one by one, and see if any of you can provide me with adequate entertainment. Fail to amuse me, and he gestured at the wreckage behind him. Well, you can see the alternative. The transmission ended. Gideon stood motionless for a long moment, processing what he had witnessed. Around him, his bridge crew exchanged nervous glances, uncertain how to respond to a threat that defied every tactical framework they Understood. Sir. His captain's voice was carefully neutral. Orders. Find out everything we can about this Alucard. Gideon's voice was ice. Origin, capabilities, weaknesses. Everything. The transmission originated from the Horus system. Moff Tanner's territory. Tanner. Gideon's lip curled. He knew Tanner, a bureaucrat playing soldier, desperate enough to dabble in Sith artifacts to compensate for his lack of actual military competence. Contact his command. Find out what he did. We've been trying, sir. All of Tanner's installations have gone dark. The only communication we've received was a brief, automated distress signal from Corbin, then nothing. Corbin, the ancient Sith homeworld. Gideon felt a cold certainty settle in his chest. He summoned something. Sir. Tanner. The fool was obsessed with the old Empire's occult research, the Emperor's Sith artifacts, the dark side experiments. Gideon's hands clenched behind his back. He tried to summon a weapon, and instead he unleashed that. The implications were staggering. If this creature was genuinely what it appeared to be, something from beyond the known galaxy, something that could destroy a Star Destroyer single-handedly, then every calculation changed. The careful chess game Gideon had been playing, maneuvering for position among the surviving Moffs while hunting the asset, suddenly seemed very small. There's more, sir. The communications officer's voice was hesitant. Before the inexorable was destroyed, they managed to transmit partial combat footage. Show me. The hologram shifted, becoming grainy security recordings from the Star Destroyer's internal cameras. Gideon watched in silence as the creature carved through stormtrooper platoons like they were made of paper. Blaster bolts passed through him without effect. A thermal detonator exploded against his chest and merely annoyed him. In one sequence, an AT-ST Walker opened fire at point-blank range, and the creature simply walked through the barrage, grabbed the vehicle's leg, and tore it off with his bare hands. But the most disturbing footage came from the bridge. Commander Varric, to his credit, had died fighting, drawn a vibroblade, and charged the creature directly. The recording showed Alucard catching the blade between two fingers, snapping it like a twig, and then leaning close to whisper something in Varric's ear. Whatever he said made the hardened Imperial commander weep before the end. Enough. Gideon's voice cut through the silence. I've seen enough. He turned from the display, mind racing through options. The creature was powerful, more powerful than anything in his arsenal. The Dark Troopers were formidable, but they were designed to fight organic opponents with conventional capabilities. This thing was neither organic nor conventional. But power wasn't everything. Gideon had risen through Imperial ranks by understanding that every asset had a vulnerability. Every weapon had a counter. The creature wanted entertainment. It wanted challenge. It was, despite its horrific capabilities, fundamentally driven by boredom. That was a weakness he could exploit. Set course for Navarro, he ordered. Sir, our intelligence indicates the Mandalorian was contacted by this creature and survived. Gideon's smile was thin and cold, which means the Mandalorian knows something we don't. And more importantly, he pulled up the tracking data on the asset, the child, the key to everything. The creature showed interest in the asset. Significant interest. You think it wants the child? I think it wants what the child represents. Power. The Force. Something that might actually challenge it. Gideon began walking toward his private quarters, dismissing the bridge crew with a gesture. Which means we have something it wants. And that gives us leverage. Alone in his chambers, Gideon activated his private communications array. There were resources the Empire had developed in its final years. Weapons, experiments, contingencies for scenarios that seemed impossible until they weren't. Most had been lost with the Death Star, but not all. Not nearly all. Connect me to Dr. Pershing, he said. Priority 1. And pull everything we have on Project Harvester. If this creature wanted the Force, Gideon would give it the Force. Just not in the way it expected. Meanwhile, aboard his borrowed shuttle, Alucard reviewed the responses to his broadcast with growing amusement. Panic signals flooding Imperial channels. Fleet movements as warlords scrambled to consolidate defenses. Bounty postings offering increasingly absurd sums for information about the Red Terror. They're scared, he murmured, scrolling through intercepted communications. Properly scared. It's almost touching. Beside him, Moff Tanner sat in rigid silence, having learned that speaking without being addressed led to unpleasant consequences. The man had been useful, but his utility was fading. His knowledge of imperial politics was superficial, his understanding of the galaxy's true powers laughably incomplete. Tell me more about this Moff Gideon. Alucard didn't look up from the data streams. You mentioned him before. The one hunting the child. Tana swallowed. He's different from the others. Patient. Methodical. He served under the ISB during the Empire's height, intelligence, and special operations. After the fall, he secured significant resources. Dark troopers, experimental battle droids far beyond standard Imperial manufacture. Battle droids. Alucard's tone was dismissive. I've already played with those. The Separatist designs were more creative. These are different. Third generation. Pure. Combat platforms with Beskar alloy plating. They're designed to be unkillable. Now Alucard looked up, interest flickering behind those orange lenses. Unkillable. That's a bold claim. Gideon believes they're the key to rebuilding the Empire. An army that doesn't retreat, doesn't surrender, doesn't feel fear. Tanner's voice steadied, slightly as he fell into familiar territory, Imperial propaganda, dreams of restored order. He's also obsessed with the child, believes its blood holds the secret to creating Force-sensitive soldiers. Force-sensitive soldiers. Alucard rolled the concept around like wine. An army of space wizards in unkillable robot bodies. That's actually not a terrible idea. He stood, stretching muscles that didn't technically need stretching, and gazed out at the stars. I think I like this Gideon. He has ambition, vision. A smile crept across his features. Let's go introduce ourselves properly. The shuttle's engines hummed to life, setting course for a collision that would reshape the galaxy's understanding of what was possible and what was survivable. The destruction of the Crimson Dawn was broadcast across 17 systems. Alucard had found the pirate fleet by accident, a convoy of modified frigates preying on refugee ships fleeing Imperial space. He had initially intended to pass them by, uninterested in common criminals, until he intercepted their communications and heard them laughing about the families they'd spaced, the children they'd sold to Hutt slavers, the pleasure they took in suffering. He changed course immediately. The battle, if it could be called that, lasted 11 minutes. Alucard didn't use the shuttle's weapons. He didn't need to. He simply opened the airlock, stepped into the vacuum of space, and walked to the nearest frigate. The pirates had never encountered anything like it. Their sensors showed a single humanoid figure drifting toward them at impossible speed, completely unprotected, surviving in conditions that should have killed any organic being instantly. They opened fire with everything they had: turbolasers, concussion missiles, point defense cannons designed to shred starfighters. Alucard caught a missile in one hand, examined it with curiosity, and threw it back. The footage that survivors transmitted before dying showed him tearing through hull plating with his bare hands, walking through sealed blast doors as if they were curtains, and moving through the ship's corridors with methodical patience. He didn't rush. He didn't need to. The pirates had nowhere to run. What made the recording truly disturbing wasn't the violence. The galaxy had seen violence, had grown numb to it after decades of war. It was the commentary. Alucard narrated his massacre like a tour guide, pointing out interesting features of the ship's design, critiquing the pirates' tactical choices, and occasionally pausing to compliment a particularly brave defender before ending them. You know, this one actually tried to stab me in the eye. His voice echoed through the final transmission. With a fork. I respect that. There's a certain desperate creativity to improvised weaponry that I find endearing. The sound of screaming, then silence. Anyway, if anyone's listening, I want you to know that slavery is boring. It's the refuge of people who lack the imagination to acquire wealth through more interesting means. Alucard's face appeared in frame, blood splattered and grinning. So consider this a public service announcement. If I catch any more of you trading in sentient beings, I will find you. I will take my time, and I will be very thorough. The transmission ended with the Crimson Dawn breaking apart, its reactor overloading, in a cascade of secondary explosions that lit up the system like a new star. News of the incident spread faster than hyperspace. Within hours, the holonet was flooded with speculation, fear, and a strange undercurrent of something else, hope. The creature that had destroyed, an Imperial Star Destroyer, had turned its attention to slavers, to pirates, to the predators who had thrived in the chaos of the post-Empire galaxy. On Tatooine, a moisture farmer who had lost his daughter to Hutt slavers wept with complicated tears. On Ryloth, Twi'lek refugees whispered prayers to gods they'd stopped believing in. On Nar Shaddaa, crime lords doubled their security details and wondered if any amount of protection would be enough. Alucard, for his part, was thoroughly enjoying himself. "This is much better than the last galaxy," he announced to no one in particular, lounging in the captain's chair of the pirate flagship he'd claimed as a trophy. The Crimson Dawn had been the fleet's command vessel, a modified Nebulan B frigate with surprisingly comfortable quarters and an impressive weapons array. Space travel, laser swords, an entire economy built on human misery just waiting to be disrupted. I should have gotten dimensionally displaced centuries ago. Moff Tanner had stopped responding to his monologues. The man sat in a corner, staring at nothing, having retreated into some private mental space where vampires and massacres couldn't reach him. Alucard didn't mind. The Moff had served his purpose, and his silence was preferable to his sniveling. The ship's communication array crackled to life. Unidentified vessel. This is the New Republic Patrol Cruiser Solidarity. You are operating in restricted space with a vessel flagged for piracy. Power down your engines and prepare to be boarded for inspection. Alucard's grin widened. Oh, wonderful. The good guys. He keyed the response channel. New Republic vessel, this is Alucard. I've just finished executing every pirate on this ship for crimes against sentient beings. Their bodies are available for recovery if you'd like to. Confirm their identities and close out any outstanding bounties. A pause. Also, I kept their snacks. The previous owners won't be needing them. Silence on the channel. Then, a different voice. Older, more cautious. This is Captain Verana of the New Republic Defense Fleet. We've received reports of your activities. You're the one who destroyed the inexorable. Guilty as charged. Alucard leaned back, propping his boots on the console. Though in my defense, they shot first. I was just introducing myself, and they got all uppity about unauthorized boarding and acts of war. Very rude. You killed 3,000 Imperial personnel. I killed 3,000 people who were actively trying to kill me while serving a fascist regime responsible for planetary genocide. Alucard's voice lost some of its playfulness. I've reviewed your history, Captain. The Empire didn't just fall because of one plucky rebellion. It fell because it was evil. Cartoonishly, systematically evil in ways that make the worst monsters of my world look like amateurs. More silence. When Verana spoke again, her tone had shifted, still cautious, but with something else beneath it. And the pirates, slavers, child traffickers, the kind of people who make me nostalgic for honest murderers. Alucard's grin returned. I did the galaxy a favor. You're welcome. The New Republic doesn't sanction vigilante justice. The New Republic doesn't sanction a lot of things, but they keep happening anyway because your government is stretched too thin to actually enforce its ideals. Alucard stood, walking to the viewport, to watch the Republic cruiser, holding position at weapons range. I'm not asking for your approval, Captain. I'm not asking for anything. I'm simply informing you that I exist, that I will continue to exist, and that I intend to spend my existence making life very unpleasant for people who deserve it. And who decides who deserves it? I do. The words were simple, absolute, carrying the weight of centuries of existence. I am the judge, jury, and executioner. Emphasis on the executioner. I have been since before your empire rose and fell, since before humanity crawled out of whatever primordial soup spawned it in this galaxy. He turned back to the communication array, and his voice softened to something almost gentle. But here's the thing, Captain. I like your republic. Not the politicians and the bureaucrats. They're the same everywhere, but the idea of it. The dream of a galaxy where people are free, where justice isn't just a word used by the powerful to justify their power. A pause. I spent a very long time serving people who claim to fight monsters while being monsters themselves. I'm done with that. Here, in this new galaxy, I get to choose who I am. And who are you choosing to be? Alucard laughed, not the predatory sound that had haunted Imperial nightmares, but something warmer, almost human. I'm still figuring that out. But I can tell you who I'm not going to be. I'm not going to be anyone's weapon, anyone's servant, anyone's attack. Dog. His reflection in the viewport showed teeth that no longer looked quite so monstrous. I'm going to be the thing that monsters fear. And in a galaxy with as many monsters as this one, that should keep me entertained for centuries. The Republic cruiser held position for a long moment. Then, slowly, it began to withdraw. We'll be watching you. Captain Verana's voice came one final time. The New Republic doesn't forget. I'm counting on it. Alucard killed the channel and turned to the navigation console. Now then, I believe I have an appointment with a moth who thinks he can control the Force. The stolen frigate jumped to hyperspace, leaving behind the debris of pirate dreams and the beginning of a legend. Bo-Katan Kryze had rebuilt the Mandalorian covert 3 times. She had watched her people scattered, hunted, reduced to hiding in the shadows of a galaxy that had once feared their name. She had made alliances with despots and rebels, compromised her principles and clung to them by turns, all in service of a single goal, the restoration of Mandalore. Now she sat in a cramped meeting room on Navarro, staring at a holographic projection of something that defied every tactical framework she understood. Play it again. The recording cycled. The creature called Alucard walking through blaster fire without flinching, tearing apart stormtroopers with casual brutality, surviving in hard vacuum, destroying a Star Destroyer from the inside while laughing. This is what walked into Navarro 3 days ago? Her voice was carefully controlled, and it just left. Din Djarin stood against the wall, arms crossed, the child's pram floating beside him. He hadn't removed his helmet since the encounter, hadn't slept more than a few hours at a time. The foundling was recovering from his exertion, but slowly, eating more than usual, sleeping in fits and starts, occasionally waking with whimpers that spoke of nightmares no child should know. It said it found us interesting. Din's modulated voice carried no emotion. It said it would see us again. That's not reassuring. It wasn't meant to be. Bo-Katan turned to the other Mandalorians present. Casca Reeves stood at attention, hand resting on her blaster, jaw tight with controlled fury. Axe Woves leaned against the doorframe, expression unreadable beneath his helmet. They had arrived within hours of receiving Din's message, dropping their own operations to respond to news that seemed impossible until they saw the footage. This changes everything. Bo-Katan's voice hardened. Gideon was dangerous enough when he just had the Dark Troopers and his obsession with the child. Now there's something else in play, something that even the Empire can't control, something no one can control, Casca added. Did you see what it did to the Inexorable? That was a fully crewed Star Destroyer, 3,000 personnel, and this thing treated it like entertainment. Din's single word hung in the air like a death sentence. Bo-Katan stood, pacing the length of the small room. Her mind raced through scenarios, none of them good. If this creature allied with the Imperial remnants, even temporarily, the balance of power would shift catastrophically. If it decided the Mandalorians were interesting prey rather than interesting company, they would be hunted to extinction. And if it turned its attention to Mandalore itself, we need information. She stopped, facing Din directly. You spoke with it. You survived. What did you learn? It's not from this galaxy. It called itself a vampire, an undead creature that sustains itself on blood. Din's helmet tilted slightly. It seemed nostalgic, like it was comparing everything here to somewhere else, somewhere it couldn't go back to. Homesick. Axe's voice dripped with disbelief. The unkillable murder thing is homesick. It also has a code. Din reached down, touching the child's pram gently. It could have killed us. It could have taken the child. Instead, it complimented my willingness to fight and walked away. A pause. It respects warriors, people who stand their ground even when they can't win. Bo-Katan absorbed this. The Mandalorian way, facing death with courage, fighting impossible odds because honor demanded it, was not unique to her people. But it was rare enough that encountering it in an alien monster was unexpected. You think we can reason with it? I think we can't not try. Din turned to face her fully. This thing is going to reshape the galaxy whether we like it or not. We can either be obstacles it destroys, or something else. Allies. Casca's voice was sharp. You want to ally with that? I want to survive. Din's response was blunt, honest, utterly Mandalorian. And more importantly, I want him to survive. He gestured to the child. If staying alive means finding common ground with a monster, then that's what I'll do. The silence that followed was heavy with implications. Bo-Katan felt the weight of leadership pressing down on her. The impossible choices, the compromises that eroded principle one decision at a time. She had made deals with the Empire itself to reclaim Mandalore. Was this really so different? There's another factor, she said finally. The creature has been broadcasting on Imperial channels, challenging the Moffs, hunting their fleets. She pulled up a star chart, highlighting recent incidents. It's been systematically attacking Imperial remnant forces, slavers, war criminals. It destroyed the Crimson Dawn pirate fleet 3 days ago, so it's targeting the bad guys. Axe's tone remained skeptical. That doesn't make it a good guy. No, but it makes it an enemy of our enemy. Bo-Katan's finger traced a path across the chart. And if I'm reading these patterns correctly, it's heading toward Gideon's territory. The two of them are going to collide. Din straightened. The Dark Troopers. Gideon's been deploying them in limited engagements, testing their capabilities. If he thinks he can use them against this creature, Bo-Katan's expression hardened. Either he's right, and we lose a potential weapon against the Empire, or he's wrong, and Gideon's forces get annihilated. Win either way? Casca asked. Not if Gideon wins and adds this thing to his arsenal. Bo-Katan shook her head. We need to be there when they clash. We need to ensure the outcome serves Mandalorian interests. And the child, Din's voice carried an edge that hadn't been there before. The child is Mandalorian. Bo-Katan met his visor without flinching. Your foundling, your responsibility, protected by our creed. Whatever happens, we don't abandon our own. Something in Din's posture shifted, tension releasing, trust building, the slow construction of alliance that could only happen between warriors who understood sacrifice. There's something else. Din reached into his belt, producing a small device. Before Alucard left, he dropped this. I don't think it was accidental. The device hummed to life, projecting a simple holographic message, coordinates, a timestamp 3 days in the future, and 2 words that made everyone in the room reach for their weapons. Come watch. It's inviting us. Casca's voice was flat. To what? To whatever it's planning for Gideon. Din studied the coordinates. This location, it's deep in Imperial remnant space, near the Mandalore sector. Bo-Katan felt a chill that had nothing to do with temperature. It knows. It knows about Mandalore, about what Gideon did to our world. It did its research. Axe pushed off from the doorframe. Question is, why does it care? No one had an answer. The child stirred in his pram, ears perking up, and spoke in that thin, reedy voice that still surprised everyone who heard it. He's lonely. All eyes turned to the foundling. His ancient gaze was distant, focused on something beyond the walls of the room. He's been alone for so long, fighting, killing, serving masters who feared him. He came here looking for something. The child's small hand pressed against his chest. He doesn't know what, but he's hoping we can help him find it. Help him find what? Din asked softly. The child's eyes met his guardian's visor with impossible wisdom. A reason not to become what everyone expects him to be. The words settled over the room like a burial shroud. Bo-Katan thought of the monster in the recordings, the casual violence, the theatrical cruelty, the joy in destruction. And then she thought of something else. A creature powerful enough to do anything it wanted, choosing to target slavers instead of innocents, respecting courage instead of crushing it. Maybe the child was right. Maybe this Alucard was standing at a crossroads, and the path he chose would depend on who he met along the way. We go. Bo-Katan's voice carried the weight of command. All of us. We accept his invitation and see what happens. And if it's a trap? Casca asked. Then we face it together. Bo-Katan placed her hand on her biscad, the ancient blade that had seen 1,000 battles. This is the way. Around the room, voices echoed in response. A chorus of purpose, determination, and the stubborn Mandalorian refusal to let fear dictate their choices. This is the way. Moff Gideon had prepared for many things. He had contingencies for New Republic assaults, for Mandalorian raids, for rival Moffs attempting to claim his territory. He had spent years building his forces, refining his dark troopers. pursuing the asset that would give him the ultimate weapon. Force-sensitive soldiers loyal only to him. He had not prepared for Alucard. The creature arrived without warning, without stealth, without any pretense of tactical subtlety. One moment, the Revenant's scanners showed empty space. The next, alarms blared as something walked through the hull on Deck 7. "Seal that section," Gideon commanded, his voice betraying nothing. "Deploy Dark Trooper Platoon 1. I want visual confirmation of the intruder." The bridge crew scrambled to comply. Holocams flickered to life, showing corridors that should have been empty. Instead, they showed carnage in progress. Alucard moved through the ship like a force of nature given malevolent form. Stormtroopers opened fire from prepared positions, and he walked through their barrage with his hands in his pockets, occasionally pausing to examine a particularly well-aimed shot with academic interest. When he reached their lines, he didn't even bother to use his hands. Shadows erupted from his coat, tendrils of darkness that moved with hungry independence, dragging screaming soldiers into depths that couldn't exist, within the confines of a ship's corridor. Fascinating architecture. His voice echoed through the internal communications, somehow broadcast on all frequencies simultaneously. Very imperial. Clean lines, oppressive lighting, absolutely no personality. A stormtrooper flew past the camera, missing several important limbs. "But the staff are delightful. Dark troopers are in position," the tactical officer reported, her voice strained. Gideon watched the screen as 12 black-armored figures stepped into the creature's path. Third-generation battle droids, each one worth more than a squadron of TIE fighters, equipped with Beskar alloy plating that could resist lightsaber strikes. They moved in perfect synchronization, raising arm-mounted blasters with mechanical precision. Alucard stopped. For the first time since boarding, he actually looked at something. "Oh, hello." His voice carried genuine interest. "You must be the famous Dark Troopers I've heard so much about. Beskar armor, advanced combat protocols, designed to be—" What was the phrase? He tapped his chin thoughtfully. "Unkillable." The lead Dark Trooper opened fire. The others followed instantly, filling the corridor with a storm of blaster bolts that would have vaporized any organic target. Alucard stood in the center of it, arms spread wide, head tilted back in something that looked almost like ecstasy. "Yes." The word was a moan of satisfaction. "This is what I've been looking for. Something that actually stings." When the barrage ended, his coat was smoking. His flesh was cratered with blackened wounds, and his grin was wider than ever. "My turn." What followed was not a battle. It was a test. Alucard engaged the Dark Troopers with focused intensity, abandoning the theatrical massacre he'd employed against organic troops. He studied their movements, their response times, their combat protocols. When the first droid swung at him with crushing force, he caught the blow and held it, feeling the hydraulic pressure, measuring the strength. Impressive. He twisted, and the arm came off with a shriek of tortured metal. Not enough, but impressive. The other Dark Troopers adapted, shifting to coordinated assault patterns, trying to overwhelm him with simultaneous attacks from multiple angles. Alucard let them. He took hits that would have crushed Durasteel, absorbed impacts that registered on the ship's seismic sensors. And through it all, he laughed. "Oh, you beautiful machines. You wonderful, relentless, stupid machines." He grabbed a Dark Trooper by the head and lifted it off the ground. "You don't feel fear. You don't hesitate. You don't negotiate or surrender or beg." His fingers tightened, and Beskar creaked under pressure that shouldn't have been possible. "You just keep fighting until one of us stops." The Dark Troopers had imploded. One by one, Alucard dismantled them. Not quickly. He drew it out, savoring each engagement, testing different approaches. Some he tore apart with raw strength. Others he dissolved with shadows that seemed to consume metal as easily as flesh. One particularly persistent unit he simply held in place while his body regenerated around its weapon, trapping the droid's arm inside his torso, before ripping it free. When the last Dark Trooper fell, Alucard stood in a corridor filled with scattered components and sparking wreckage. His wounds were already healing, flesh knitting back together with wet, organic sounds that the ship's audio sensors faithfully recorded. 12 units. He sounded almost disappointed. "I was hoping for more of a challenge." Still, he picked up a severed Dark Trooper arm, examining the craftsmanship. Best I've encountered in this galaxy so far. Whoever designed these actually understood what it means to build a weapon. On the bridge, Gideon watched with cold calculation. The footage confirmed what he had feared. Direct engagement was not viable. The Dark Troopers, his finest achievement, had been reduced to scrap in minutes. But they had lasted minutes. Against a creature that had walked through Star Destroyer defenses in seconds. That was significant. Order all remaining Dark Trooper units to fall back, he commanded. Initiate Protocol Omega. Sir, Protocol Omega will. I know what it will do. Gideon's voice was ice. Do it. Protocol Omega was a contingency he had hoped never to use. The Revenant was equipped with a specialized weapon system. Experimental. Dangerous. Derived from the same research that had created the Dark Troopers. It was designed to neutralize force-sensitive targets by flooding a contained area with energy, patterns that disrupted midi-chlorian function. It had never been tested on anything like Alucard, but it was the only option left. Throughout the ship, generators hummed to life. The lights flickered, shifted, took on a sickly greenish tinge. And Alucard, for the first time since arriving in this galaxy, felt something new. Pain. Oh, he stumbled, catching himself against the wall. His regeneration slowed, wounds that should have closed in seconds remaining open, seeping blood that was darker than any human's. What is this? The energy permeated everything. Air, metal, the very fabric of the ship. It wasn't attacking him directly. It was attacking the connection between his physical form and the millions of souls that sustained it. The screaming chorus inside his mind, usually a comfortable background noise, became discordant, fragmented. Clever. Alucard forced himself upright, grinning through the pain. Very clever, Moff. You found something that actually hurts. He began walking toward the bridge, each step an act of will against the disrupting energy. His form flickered, shadows writhing beneath his skin, struggling to maintain cohesion. The souls he had consumed over centuries were being scattered, their essence dispersing into the hostile field. For the first time in longer than he could remember, Alucard faced the possibility of genuine defeat, and he found it exhilarating. Release. Restraint. Level 1. The words were ritual, habit, a command structure imposed on him by masters long dead. But the meaning remained. The limiters he had placed on his own power, not for his benefit, but for the benefit of anyone who might accidentally face him at full strength, dissolved. The shadows didn't just writhe. They exploded. From Alucard's body erupted a tide of darkness that filled the corridor, the deck, the entire section of the ship. Within that darkness, shapes moved, faces, forms. The echoes of everyone he had ever consumed. Soldiers and criminals, saints and sinners, warriors and victims. An army of the dead that had no physical form but undeniable presence. The disruption field wavered. It was designed to scatter souls, but it had never encountered this many souls, bound together by a will that had defied death itself for 500 years. Gideon watched his sensors spike, readings going off scale, measurements that made no physical sense. The creature wasn't just surviving his countermeasure. It was overpowering it through sheer volume of consumed essence. Sir, the tactical officer's voice cracked. The field generators are overloading. If we don't shut them down. Gideon's jaw tightened. And prepare my shuttle. The field collapsed. Throughout the Revenant, lights returned to normal, and the oppressive energy dissipated. In the corridor outside the bridge, the shadows slowly receded, revealing Alucard standing alone, breathing heavily, but very much intact. His grin was gone, replaced by something more dangerous, genuine respect. That was good, Moff Gideon. His voice carried through the blast doors. That was the best anyone has managed in a very long time. A pause. I think I'm going to enjoy killing you. The blast doors began to melt. The bridge of the Revenant was a masterwork of Imperial engineering, clean lines, redundant systems, crew stations arranged for maximum efficiency. Moff Gideon had spent years making it his throne room, the heart of his ambitions for a restored empire. Now it was about to become his tomb. The blast doors didn't just melt. They screamed. Metal that could withstand turbolaser impacts ran like wax, glowing white-hot, dripping to the deck in pools that hissed and spattered. Through the widening gap, darkness poured in, not the absence of light, but something active, something that moved with predatory intent. Bridge crew abandoned their stations, fleeing toward the auxiliary exits. Gideon didn't stop them. There was no point. What was coming couldn't be stopped by warm bodies and blaster pistols. He stood alone at the center of the bridge, hands clasped behind his back, the darksaber humming at his hip. It was a futile gesture, he knew. He had seen what this creature did to Dark Troopers, to Star Destroyers, to everything that tried to stand against it. The darksaber was a symbol, not a weapon, not against something like Alucard. But Gideon was Imperial, and Imperials did not run. The darkness parted like a curtain, and Alucard stepped through, his boots crunching on the still-cooling metal of the ruined doorframe. His appearance had changed since the disruption field, his face more gaunt, his eyes burning brighter, his movements carrying an edge of something that might have been exhaustion or might have been barely restrained fury. Moff Gideon. The name was savored like fine wine. At last, the man who thinks he can harness the Force. The creature that thinks it can't be stopped. Gideon's voice was steady. We've both been wrong about many things. Alucard laughed, not the theatrical cackle he used for intimidation, but something genuine, almost warm. Oh, I like you. You're standing there, alone, no Dark Troopers left, no army between us, and you're still playing the superior officer. He spread his arms wide. This is what I've been looking for. Someone who faces death with dignity. I'm not facing death. Gideon's hand moved to the darksaber, drawing the ancient weapon with practiced precision. The blade ignited, its distinctive whine filling the bridge. Black energy edged with white light. I'm facing a challenge. Alucard's eyes fixed on the blade with sudden intensity. Now that is interesting. A lightsaber, but not a lightsaber. The color is wrong. The sound is different. He tilted his head, studying the weapon. What is it? The darksaber. Forged by the first Mandalorian. Jedi over 1,000 years ago. Gideon shifted into a combat stance. It has killed Jedi and Sith alike. It has decided the fate of Mandalore itself. A weapon with history, with meaning. Alucard's grin returned. But different now, hungry in a way that went beyond violence. I've killed gods and demons with weapons like that. Blades that carried the weight of ages. They're the only kind worth dying on. Then come and die. Gideon attacked. He was not a warrior born. His skills lay in manipulation and strategy, in the patient application of power through systems and structures. But he had trained with the darksaber, had learned to channel his will through its unstable blade, had made himself worthy of the weapon through sheer determination. It wasn't enough. Alucard moved like liquid shadow, flowing around the blade's arc, letting it pass through spaces he had occupied milliseconds before. He didn't counterattack, not yet. He was testing, the same way he had tested the Dark Troopers, learning the weapon's capabilities, measuring its threat. The blade is plasma, but not quite. He dodged another strike, close enough that the darksaber's edge singed the hem of his coat. There's something else. Some energy I don't recognize. The Force. Gideon pressed his attack, using the darksaber's unique weight and balance to drive Alucard back. The darksaber responds to its wielder's will. It becomes stronger or weaker based on their focus, their determination. Will-powered weaponry. Alucard caught the blade. Not dodged. Caught. His gloved hand closed around the energy blade, and steam rose from the contact. Flesh blackening, but holding. I spent decades fighting opponents who thought will was enough. He squeezed, and the darksaber's whine became a shriek of protest. In my experience, will only matters when you have the power to back it up. He twisted, and Gideon felt the weapon torn from his grip, not through strength alone, but through something deeper. A contest of determination that the vampire won through sheer weight of centuries. The darksaber clattered to the deck, deactivating. Gideon stood unarmed, staring into eyes that glowed like hellfire. But I'll give you this, Moff. Alucard released his burned hand, watching the flesh regenerate with detached interest. You fought. Not well, but with everything you had. That's more than most. If you're going to kill me, do it. Gideon's voice didn't waver. I won't beg. I know you won't. Alucard circled him slowly, predator assessing prey. That's what makes you interesting. You've done terrible things. I've seen the records. The experiments, the children you've vivisected in search of power. By any reasonable moral standard, you deserve everything I could do to you. Then do it. But here's the thing. Alucard stopped, facing Gideon directly. I've killed a lot of people who deserved it. Thousands. Millions. Probably. over the centuries. And it never gets boring, exactly, but he paused, searching for words. It's not satisfying anymore. The hunt, the kill, the fear in their eyes. It's all so predictable. What are you saying? I'm saying that killing you would be easy. And easy is boring. Alucard's grin returned, sharp and dangerous. So instead, I'm going to do something much worse. Before Gideon could respond, alarms screamed across the bridge. Proximity alerts, collision warnings. The automated systems detecting something the crew had been too panicked to notice. Ships, dozens of them, dropping out of hyperspace around the Revenant. Mandalorian ships. Oh, Alucard glanced at the view screen, satisfaction evident in his voice. Right on time. You planned this. Gideon's composure finally cracked. You invited them? I wanted an audience for what comes next. Alucard walked to the viewport, gazing out at the assembling fleet. Do you know why the Mandalorians hate you, Moff? It's not just because you hunted them, persecuted them, forced them into hiding. It's because of what you did to their home. The word hung in the air like an accusation. Mandalore. Alucard turned back to face him. You were there, weren't you? During the Purge. You helped reduce their world to glass and ash. Killed their warriors. Scattered their people. Took the Darksaber as a trophy of their defeat. I followed orders. You enjoyed it. Alucard's voice dropped to something cold and absolute. I can smell it on you. The satisfaction of breaking something ancient and proud. The pleasure of power exercised without restraint. He picked up the Darksaber, igniting it with casual ease. And the blade sang in his hand, not struggling, not protesting, but resonating. I'm not going to kill you, Moff Gideon. I'm going to do something much more fitting. He offered the blade, hilt first, to the viewport where the Mandalorian fleet waited. I'm going to give you to them. The communication array crackled to life, and Bo-Katan Kryze's voice filled the bridge. This is the Mandalorian fleet to Imperial Vessel Revenant. We have you surrounded. Power down your weapons and prepare to be boarded. A pause, heavy with decades of accumulated grief and rage. Moff Gideon, by the authority of the Mandalorian people, you are under arrest for crimes against our world and our people. You will face justice. Gideon looked at Alucard, at the monster who could have killed him, should have killed him, and instead had chosen this. This is crueler than death. I know. Alucard's smile was almost gentle. That's the point. He dropped the Darksaber at Gideon's feet and walked toward the ruined blast doors. One more thing, Moff. The child you've been hunting? The little green one with the big ears and the terrifying potential. He paused at the threshold. Leave him alone. He's under my protection now. And unlike you, I never let go of things that belong to me. Then he was gone, dissolving into shadows that shouldn't exist, leaving Gideon alone on the bridge of his dying ship with the sound of Mandalorian boarding pods locking onto the hull. In the viewport, the Darksaber's blade reflected. Off the approaching fleet, the weapon that would decide Mandalore's future, returned at last to those who understood its meaning. And somewhere in the darkness between stars, Alucard laughed, and the galaxy trembled, with the echo of something that had finally found a reason to care. The trial of Moff Gideon was broadcast across the galaxy. It wasn't a New Republic proceeding. Bo-Katan had made that clear from the beginning. This was Mandalorian justice, conducted according to traditions that predated the Republic itself. The accused would face his victims. The evidence would be presented without political consideration, and the judgment would be final. Gideon stood in chains forged from Beskar, surrounded by warriors whose ancestors he had helped slaughter. The Darksaber hung at Bo-Katan's hip, reclaimed at last, its weight a reminder of everything that had been lost and everything that might still be rebuilt. The proceedings lasted 3 days. Survivors testified. Records were presented. The full scope of Gideon's crimes, not just against Mandalore, but against countless worlds, caught in his pursuit of power, was laid bare for the galaxy to witness. On the 4th day, sentence was pronounced. Din Djarin watched from the back of the assembly hall, the child sleeping peacefully in his arms for the first time in weeks. The foundling's nightmares had stopped the moment Alucard left the Revenant, as if some oppressive weight had been lifted from the Force itself. You're not staying for the execution? Bo-Katan's voice was quiet as she approached after the pronouncement. I've seen enough death. Din looked down at the child. He needs peace, a chance to grow without running. The Jedi will have to wait. Din's voice carried an edge that surprised even him. He's been through too much. We both have. I need to find somewhere safe. Somewhere quiet. Bo-Katan nodded slowly. She understood, perhaps better than anyone, the weight of protecting something precious in a galaxy that wanted to destroy it. The creature. She glanced toward the shadows as if expecting red eyes to appear. Alucard. He kept his word. Delivered Gideon, left the Darksaber. Disappeared without demanding anything in return. He's still out there. Yes. Bo-Katan's hand rested on the Darksaber's hilt. But I don't think he's our enemy. Not anymore. Din wasn't sure he agreed. The vampire was beyond categories. Like enemy or ally, a force of nature that operated according to principles. No one fully understood. But he had protected the child. Had shown mercy when mercy was unexpected. Had given the Mandalorians a victory that might finally turn the tide toward reclaiming their homeworld. Maybe that was enough. Maybe understanding wasn't necessary. This is the way, Din said softly. This is the way. Bo-Katan clasped his forearm in the warrior's greeting. May the Force be with you, Din Djarin. Both of you. The Razor Crest lifted off from Navarro 2 hours later. Its battered hull carrying precious cargo toward the unknown. Behind them, the Mandalorians began the long process of reunification, scattered clans coming together. Old grudges set aside in the face of renewed hope. The Darksaber had returned. Gideon had fallen. And somewhere in the darkness between stars, something ancient and terrible had decided they were worth protecting. It wasn't peace. Not yet. But it was a beginning. Alucard watched the ship depart from the roof of Navarro's highest tower, invisible to sensors and eyes alike. The child had sensed him. Of course, those oversized ears had twitched, and ancient eyes had turned toward his hiding spot with something that might have been acknowledgement, not fear. Not anymore. Goodbye, little one, he thought, though he didn't speak aloud. Grow strong. Learn to use that power inside you. And maybe, someday, give me a proper fight. The Mandalorian fleet was preparing to depart as well, heading toward Mandalore itself, a world still scarred by Imperial devastation, but no longer forbidden. Bo-Katan had announced her intention to begin reclamation efforts, to transform the graveyard of her people into a homeland once more. It would take generations. But Mandalorians were patient when it mattered. Alucard considered his options. The galaxy stretched before him, vast and violent and full of possibilities. The Imperial remnants were scattered, leaderless, ripe for hunting. The New Republic was struggling to maintain order across too many systems. With too few resources, criminal syndicates operated with impunity in the Outer Rim. And somewhere, in temples and hidden enclaves, Force users survived, Jedi in hiding, Sith cultists pursuing forbidden power, traditions older than either that might finally provide him with worthy opposition. He could spend centuries here and never run out of entertainment. But something had changed. The encounter with the Mandalorian, with the child, with Gideon's desperate last stand. It had stirred something he thought long dead. Not conscience exactly, not morality in any traditional sense, but investment. A sense that this galaxy, unlike his own, still had stories worth telling. I suppose I need a new hobby, he mused to no one. Monster hunting is getting repetitive. Perhaps I'll try monster mentoring. The idea was absurd. Alucard, teacher and guide to wayward souls. The very concept would have made Integra laugh herself sick. But Integra was gone, lost to another universe, another lifetime, along with everything else that had once defined him. Here, he could be anyone, do anything, become something the galaxy had never seen. A protector who inspired terror, a savior who demanded nothing, a nightmare that hunted other nightmares. The no-life king rides again. He grinned into the darkness. But this time on my terms. He dissolved into shadow, scattering across the night sky like a flock of impossible birds. The people of Navarro would tell stories later, of red eyes glimpsed in the darkness, of laughter that echoed without source, of a presence that watched over them like a guardian from hell itself. The stories would spread. They always did. And in time, Alucard would become something new in galactic mythology. Not Sith, not Jedi, not aligned with any faction or creed. Something older, something stranger, something that even the Force itself couldn't quite comprehend. On 100 worlds, slavers would wake in terror from dreams of shadows. In Imperial remnant strongholds, officers would triple their guards and pray to gods they didn't believe in. And in the quiet spaces between stars, a vampire who had lost everything would slowly, impossibly, begin to find something worth existing for. The galaxy far, far away had seen empires rise and fall, had witnessed the birth and death of religions, had endured wars that reshaped the very fabric of civilization. It had never seen anything like Alucard, and it never would again. What happens when an unstoppable force enters a galaxy defined by the eternal? Struggle between light and darkness? The answer, it turns out, is chaos, but chaos with purpose. Alucard's arrival in the Star Wars galaxy during the Mandalorian era created ripples that would be felt for generations. Moff Gideon's ambitions ended not with Imperial triumph, but with Mandalorian justice. The Dark Troopers, meant to restore the Empire's dominance, became scrap metal in a creature's test of strength. And the child, the foundling called Grogu, gained a protector that no Sith Lord, no Imperial Moff, no bounty hunter would dare challenge. But perhaps the most significant change was in Alucard himself, a monster defined by centuries of violence and service to others. Causes found something unexpected in this strange new reality: freedom, and the terrible responsibility that comes with it. The no-life king had been many things across his long existence: weapon, servant, nightmare, legend. In the galaxy far, far away, he would become something else entirely. He would become a choice. And in a universe where destiny and prophecy shaped the fate of worlds, the power to choose was the most dangerous weapon of all. The Force watched and wondered, and waited to see what this impossible creature would do next. It would be waiting for a very long time.